temptation. To begin our discussion, it is fundamental that we understand that what makes a thought or an action sinful is that it is something freely and consciously chosen by us in opposition to God's law. A person who suffers from mental ailments may have moments when he does or says things he cannot control. No matter how badly he may behave, his actions committed at those times are not sinful because he does not freely will them. Likewise, a Catholic who has never been taught anything about his faith may genuinely not be aware that missing the Mass on Sundays is a grave sin. He fails to go to church from time to time, but otherwise tries to live accordingly to what he knows of God's law. This person is not guilty of the sin of missing Mass because he truly did not know he was doing wrong, even though his actions were objectively wrong.
Okay, because this is only if you, just really don't know, if you didn't know it was a thing. Like, for example, if a guy who doesn't go to church, but he didn't know he had to. He didn't know he even had to. Like, he goes from time to time, but he didn't know it was an obligation.
To go every week, every Sunday. But also says, for example, he gives the example of a person who is mentally ill. If they do things that they didn't... there are things that people who are mentally ill, they do things that they do not actually will them. It just happens because they're sick in the mind. So he gives the same example for Catholics who do not know their catechism, which is still not a good thing. It's not a good thing. You got to know our catechism, but it was through no fault of his,
Yeah.
So even though it's true that people who have mental illnesses that do not will something, they do something but they don't will it, even though that's not a sin, don't mistake it, because I know some people that they say, oh, I had this mental illness. That's why, or at least I think I had this mental illness. This is why I'm doing this. No. But here's the thing. You know it's bad anyways. You know it's bad. Why are you doing it? And a lot of people, they just say this, they don't even know if they have it. They just self-diagnose themselves and they say, yeah, I have this mental illness. But that's because they don't want to take responsibility for their actions. That's what it is.
Because they need an excuse to not do any of this stuff.
Yeah, they don't want to take responsibility. They just want to say, oh, it's that mental illness that I have. Oh, well. No
problem. There. And Yippee for me.
Whoever listens to this is going to know. Whoever, they're going to know. Because I know some people, and they're going to know who I'm talking about. Okay? So, don't get mad at me if you hear this, please. But it's the truth.
They comment on us.
You can't be making excuses for your sins, because that's one of the things we're going to look at in here is that we need to accept. We need to accept that we sinned. We did a wrong to God. We got to take responsibility for our actions. Nobody else, we did them. We knew it was wrong. People just use a mental illness, or even though they don't even know they have it, they just say it because they're doing things that, they just do bad things and they don't want to take responsibility for it. Obviously, there's people, I just said, they have mental illnesses and, they don't control, but they don't even know, that it's bad, or they're doing it, or that they're even doing it. So, in other words, take responsibility for your sins. It's no one else's fault. It's your fault. So, don't make silly excuses, okay? Just take responsibility. That's the first step into overcoming sin. Because a lot of these things that you're feeling that has similar to other illnesses is actually because of the way you're living your life. That's one. 2, you're anxious. Or 3, you're depressed. Those 3 things can be the thing that's happening. And I don't mean clinically depressed where you're just not wrong. You're just depressed for anything. I'm just talking about where you're depressed because of a certain thing. And just stress, anxiety, sin, and depression can cause these things. In fact, sin can cause depression. Sin can cause anxiety. It all comes from sin. So we gotta we gotta man up. We gotta man up here. You know, lift those heavy weights, punch the bags hard as you can. Of sin. You know, with the grace of God. Okay, we're gonna
Also,
go. The
Okay.
next paragraph.
Also, for those of you who are depressed, don't stay in your bed or your basement and literally just
What?
lay down pitying yourself about everything wrong going on with your life.
Yeah, because here's the thing: one of the roots of depression and anxiety is pride. And here's the thing: you might be saying to yourself, if you know you have these things, no, how could you say that? That's so what's it
Rude.
called? That's so insensitive of you. I'm just kidding. Well, no, it's not. It's the truth. The truth will set you free, brother. Okay? It's the truth. You're thinking about yourself. You're just constantly thinking about yourself. That's what it is. Oh, I feel this way. I feel that way. I feel this way. Okay? I'm not denying the fact that there's actual mental illnesses that make you feel that way. Okay? I'm just saying a lot of people that I know personally, they act this way. They don't really have like a mental illness of any of this sort. Okay?
And
Thoughts or desires, then, are, although they may be disordered in themselves, are not imputed to us personally as sins unless we knowingly and freely consent to them as evil. Therefore, since our free will is free, sin can only affect us by presenting itself to us in a way that attracts us freely. Sin offers us some pleasure, a reward that, in the weakness of our fallen nature, we allow ourselves to desire more than doing what we know to be the right thing. Hence, sin is a process that begins with our thoughts. And if we desire to make progress against sin, we have to become familiar with the psychology of temptation. Catholic tradition, following St. Augustine, points out 3 stages of temptation: suggestion, pleasure, and consent. Suggestion. In this stage, a thought or an image is presented to our imagination or our mind, which our intellect recognizes to be disordered. At this point, there is no sin, because even though the thought may be hard to eliminate from our minds, still we have not consented to the thought. Okay, so in this stage, it just came to us. Okay? Wait. When it comes to us, the sin, the image, the impure image, or any other, sin, it comes into our minds. So, once we figure it out, it's disordered, we still haven't committed sin yet. Okay? Even if it's hard to take out of our mind. Then comes the next stage, right after we've discerned whether it's disordered or not. Which, if it's an impure image, we can obviously discern whether it's bad or not very fast.
Of course, you will get images if you look at photos, but they can also just come out of nowhere. You can literally just be having a good day in the park staring at the clouds or whatever, or walking your dog, and it'll come out just out of nowhere.
Well, yeah, because God, the devil's constantly working, and our own body is working against our soul. It says the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That's what St. Paul says. So we gotta know that, like it said in the first paragraph that I read, sin is always present. It's always it's gonna be. It's always gonna be present in our lives. That's what I mean to say. Okay, second stage, pleasure. Lower bodily nature is attracted to the thought or image and reacts with pleasure. This pleasure happens spontaneously, and though it may be even a strong sensation, such feelings are not in themselves evidence that we had consented to the thought. In fact, such feelings will often occur against our will. Thus, St. Paul says in Galatians chapter 5, verses 17, "For the desires of the flesh are against the spirit, and the desires of the spirit are against the flesh. For though these are opposed to each other, to prevent you from doing what you would." Yet, even if we have not consented to them, strong feelings of attraction to a sinful suggestion are obviously dangerous. So, a lot of times, as soon as we get a thought, we feel we're already experiencing pleasure. But we haven't consented to it yet. It's when we consent that, the sin starts. So, we're going to see in the next paragraph how that is. So in this stage, either rejection or consent. At this point, the will must either reject the disordered idea or accept it. If it refuses to accept the pleasure offered by the thought and rejects it, the will has won the struggle and has performed an action that is worthy of reward in God's sight. I keep on saying things weird. If the will accepts the pleasure offered by the disordered idea and enjoys it, it has begun to consent to it. And we now enter to the area of sin. So
this feels like the instructions for like a card game or something.
So at this point, if we reject it, there's no sin. If we consent to it, then we sin. But now we're going to look into the stages of how serious the sin becomes.
Yeah. Okay.
So it says if we reject it, it's something worthy of reward, which God is going to reward us for rejecting this just because of the fact that we can say no. So now we're going to go into the next one, because it is often difficult to know whether we have consented to a sinful thought or to what extent. Consent can be imperfect when, for instance, we hesitate to reject a temptation either out of negligence or because, as so often happens, we want to briefly taste a sinful pleasure. Often we resist, but only half-heartedly. Nevertheless, since in the end we do resist the temptation, our consent was not complete. Imperfect consent modifies the guilt of our sin. For every sinful action, which would normally be a mortal sin if committed with full consent, may only be a venial sin when committed with imperfect consent.
Okay, so like okay. So what he means by consent is like you just go for it. Like you just give an entire.
Like I said, to make a mortal sin, you need to know it's bad. You know it's bad, and you do it anyways. You give consent to doing it. So, in this thing, it's a mortal sin. If you're like, I don't care if it's a sin, I'm doing this. I'm gonna think this bad thing or whatever. But when you're like, sort of, you're hesitating, and then after a little while, you're like, no. But you already sort of consented a little bit into the pleasure, then it's only a venial sin.
Yeah.
But if you're like, I don't care, I'm going full on,
If you literally jump into
ball pit?
Yeah, ball pit. You're just like, I'm doing it.
Anyway, so there, it modifies the sin, with in an imperfect rejection or imperfect consent. Because you're like, I really want to do this, but I know it's bad. So then you like, you go into it, and then you're like, no. And then you get out. But you still consented to a little bit of the pleasure. So, in that sense, it's only a venial sin, okay? Full consent, mortal sin. Imperfect consent, venial sin. So, continuing. On the other hand, we can know that our consent was full if we have allowed our will to freely enjoy the pleasure that comes from dwelling on the temptation. We have committed a sin of thought. If, from enjoyment of the pleasure, we pass to desire for the temptation, we add more guilt to the sin. Finally, if we then move to act on our sinful desires, we commit a sin of action.